New World Screwworm is affecting a part of South Texas without a Congress member. Why some say that should spur a quick special election today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm Laura Rice. UT researchers believe they've figured out who has been scrambling GPS signals across huge swaths of Europe in recent years. We'll find out about their discovery and what it might mean. The World Cup means lots of fans descending upon Texas cities. Environmental scientists will be studying their impact in real time. Plus, a new film invites all Texans to participate in the ecological recovery of the Guadalupe River after devastating flooding. And it may be a bit harder to get your hands on a Fredericksburg peach this year. Why that may be a growing trend today on the Texas Standard. From Anton to Beeville, it's the Texas Standard for Wednesday, June 10th. I'm Laura Rice. Fun fact about me, I like insects. There are exceptions, of course. I loathe fruit flies and am fighting a losing battle against my nemesis, the mosquito. But insects, by and large, are pretty interesting. Texas Standard's go-to insect expert, Wizzy Brown, has taught me a ton about this fascinating layer of our world that most of us ignore or straight up avoid. In some cases, this world is stranger than science fiction. Take the antlion, that's basically a creature straight out of Star Wars. Or how about the fly with a scorpion tail? Then there are the ensign wasps that kill cockroaches and mud daubers that go after spiders. Depending on your phobias, they might be your friends. I think we all draw the line, though, on the New World Screwworm. As we've been reporting for over a year now, the parasitic fly is nasty and a huge threat to Texas's cattle industry. And as of last week, it's really here. But there's a limiting factor in the federal and state response to eradicate the fly. One part of Texas most directly affected by the screwworm does not have a current congressional representative. The 23rd district seat has been vacant since Representative Tony Gonzalez resigned in April amid an ethics investigation. Gabby Birnbaum covers D.C. for the Texas Tribune. Gabby, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Why does it matter that the district where much of this is happening doesn't have a congressional representative right now?
Well, look, and I want to be clear, there's other members of Congress in South Texas and West Texas who are, engaged on this issue. But when something happens in your jurisdiction, sometimes you can get more immediate answers from federal officials. Members of Congress, right, have the ability to compel information from federal agencies. It's much easier for them to convene, right, meetings of officials from relevant agencies, to convene meetings with constituents. Oftentimes, it'll be easier for constituents if they know who their representative is to, go to their website and their social media and get information. So I think it just can facilitate sort of more information sharing, and they just sort of have a bigger microphone, right, to talk about this stuff. And we've seen, the majority of these screwworm cases so far have been in this vacant congressional district along the border. And so you have, candidates now who are trying to fill in that gap, but there's only so much they can do.
Well, let's talk about those two candidates. We know who the Republican and the Democrat are in this race. We don't know when yet this special election will be. We'll get to that. But how are their hands tied, or what are they unable to do that a full Congress member would be able to do as far as getting information out?
Yeah, so members of Congress, for example, right, can send letters asking questions of federal officials and, oftentimes get answers. They just, being up in D.C., you're more connected often to the people in the Department of Ag, for example, which is relevant here at USDA. Oftentimes they have relationships with people. They could participate in hearings if I would assume they're going to be hearings coming about screwworm, and they can ask questions, things of that nature. And so because they're not in office, they're doing their best. Both of them are sort of communicating with ranchers. Brandon Herrera, who's the Republican, told me he has meetings lined up with some agency personnel to try to chat through ranchers' concerns, but they're doing that sort of in their capacity as a candidate and as a private citizen, essentially, not as an elected official who, can get their phone calls answered more quickly often.
You mentioned the Republican there. The Democrat in the race is Katie Padilla-Stout. This is something they agree on. They both kind of wish this election would move forward, and they see this screwworm crisis as one reason to do that quickly.
Padilla-Stout certainly thinks that, yeah. Herrera told me he was sort of prepared to run in May, but the governor didn't end up calling an election, right? But yeah, Padilla-Stout definitely has been calling for a quick an expedient special election. The governor does have the power to set one, if he says an emergency dictates it. And her point was sort of that if this isn't an emergency, what is, basically.
Is this timeline for a special election in this case normal, or has Abbott waited longer than he usually does to get something on the calendar?
Yeah, so the only sort of analogous example is that in April of 2018, Representative on the Gulf Coast Blake Farenthold resigned. And Governor Abbott, that was a Republican seat, right? Governor Abbott cited sort of Hurricane Harvey response as an emergency reason to have a special election, and they had that June. Tony Gonzalez also resigned in April, so he could have done that. Cited a reason for it. He didn't, and so now at this point, it seems pretty likely that this election is going to be in November. It seems unlikely to me that it would happen before then.
So talk to me about, I guess, what exactly is at stake here. This is one of the biggest cattle ranching parts of Texas?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's tons of ranchers, tons of cattle and calves throughout this district. It's the biggest by physical geography district in Texas. So it runs from El Paso County to San Antonio and includes counties along the border in West Texas and South Texas counties in the San Antonio area. And so, the cattle ranching industry, the livestock industry is absolutely critical to this district and to the state, right? And so that matters both, for ranchers, hoping to, make sure their herds aren't affected by this disease, and then also for the ability to produce beef, and that matters for consumers. So I think, this is something that people are really nervous about, and that ranchers in particularly have been sort of raising the alarm about, and want to ensure it is handled properly.
Let me ask you about where things stand on sort of, at this point, I guess, containing what is an outbreak in the United States. I don't know if outbreak is too strong, but it's here, right? New World Screwworm is here. So the USDA did break ground on this sterile fly facility in Edinburgh in April. Do we have an opening date yet for that? I mean, this is the way that they eradicated screwworm in the U.S. Last time it was here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that facility is not tracked to come online until 2027. The Department of Agriculture and the Secretary said they're going to fast track it, but I don't think we know exactly how quickly that could come online. They're releasing sterile flies, right? That's already happening. There's some questions over, are they releasing enough and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, the technology sort of exists and they were able to eradicate it previously. The question is, how big is this going to get, right? Right now we have 5 confirmed cases, 3 in calves, 1 in a dog and 1 in a goat. And so I think everyone's just sort of looking to the Department of Agriculture, and Texas A&M is involved in the recovery, which I think gives a lot of people confidence, and the state to sort of keep people informed and, sort of evaluate their efforts to contain it.
From a political standpoint, is there anything else in this that you're watching right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely already some sort of politicizing of who's to blame. The Trump administration and Secretary Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture, have blamed this on sort of mass migration in the Biden era, and that, livestock susceptible were coming, that screwworm jumped the Darien Gap, which is between Panama and Colombia a few years ago, and that, migration patterns and, what they say are Biden open border policies allowed this to happen. Democrats have pointed to the fact that, there were significant cuts and reductions in force at the Department of Agriculture, A, and then B, looking at potential DOGE grant cuts to see if there was anything there that affected the ability to produce sterile flies or monitor the situation. I would say it's not, I think we need to sort of wait and see before jumping to any conclusions, but those sort of political narratives are definitely already taking root.
Gabby Birnbaum covers D.C. for the Texas Tribune. Gabby, thank you so much.
Thank you.
When mid-May rolls around, Texas peach lovers descend upon the hill country. The area around Fredericksburg is famous for its peaches, and they're best enjoyed as close to harvest as possible. In recent years, though, the peaches have been harder to get your hands on due to a series of small crops. The Texas Standard's Michael Marks has more.
At their farm stand outside Fredericksburg, Eckhart Orchards has all kinds of local produce for sale. Watermelons, squash, jalapenos, tomatoes, but the peaches are the big draw.
I've been coming here since I was a little girl to Fredericksburg to buy peaches.
That's Marlene Russell. She drove 100 miles from her home in Fort McCavett on a clear Thursday morning to get Fredericksburg peaches. She likes to stock up so she can eat some, freeze some, and make cobblers, too.
If it's a big crop, sometimes I make 3 or 4 trips down here.
But it's not a big peach crop in the hill country this year. In a kitchen that smells like coleslaw and cobbler attached to the farm stand, Diane Eckhart says the small harvest is due to a warm winter.
The piece that we were lacking this year to have a full crop was the cold hours, the chill hours. We were marginal on them.
Diane is part of the third generation of Eckharts to grow peaches in the hill country. After the first frost of winter, she and other growers start counting chill hours, generally defined as time between 45 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit.
Particularly January and February is when we get the majority of our colds. We want those nice cloudy January and February days.
Too few chill hours in the winter means the tree won't bear much fruit in the spring.
So that's been the big struggle the last 3 years is we just haven't had the cold weather.
That's Larry Stein, professor and horticulturalist for the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. He's been studying Texas peaches for 40 years. Stein says that year after year of minimal chill can stress trees long term. It can impact fruit quality as well as quantity.
Low chill peaches are elongated and they don't necessarily develop full quality like a typical peach would.
The hill country became a peach mecca because it has the right soil and climate. The winters were cold enough without freezing too frequently. A layer of clay under a sandy loam helped carry the trees through droughts. Earlier growers could rely solely on rainfall to water their trees. That's harder to do now with drier weather. Eckhart Orchards now irrigate some of their crops to supplement rainfall. Behind the stand in a small orchard, Diane points out trees with skimpy branches.
This is a variety that did not set real well this year. This is Dixieland. So there's not a whole lot of fruit on these trees.
Eckhart has some peaches for sale. Availability will vary as different varieties ripen throughout the summer. The day I was there, you could buy 1/8 of a bushel, about 6 pounds, of Crimson Lady peaches for $29. Drought and warmer winters may make it harder to grow peaches, but Eckhart has no plans to stop.
For my generation, I was gifted with it. I didn't have to buy this land, and it's a gift that it grows wonderful things. So that just like you can't ignore that. You kind of feel like you gotta do what the land does best, you know.
She's going to plant some new crops for the fall in order to make up for the small peach harvest, including pumpkins, okra, and blackberries. I'm Michael Marks for the Texas Standard.
Still ahead, how some UT researchers think they solved a years-long mystery on the other side of the world and what they do with the information now. That's just ahead on the Texas Standard.
Support for Texas Standard comes from University Extension at UT Austin, offering open enrollment to a wide variety of UT's undergraduate credit courses that can be taken by anyone from anywhere. Learn more at extension.utexas.edu.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. For years, navigation experts noticed something strange. Every now and then, GPS signals would be jammed across huge swaths of Europe, like a continent-wide blackout, not for long, sometimes just a few seconds, but long enough to raise a question: who or what was interfering with one of the most important technologies on Earth? Now researchers at the University of Texas believe they've solved at least part of the mystery, the who's responsible part. But is it intentional? Still unclear. And there's a bigger concern here because GPS isn't just about getting directions on your smartphone. It's a big part of the invisible electronic backbone of modern life. And there are fears that this GPS jamming may hint at a massive escalation in electronic warfare. If so, a lot of ifs here. We may be far more vulnerable to an electronic attack than most of us realize. Todd Humphreys directs the Radio Navigation Laboratory at the University of Texas at Austin, and he's one of the researchers behind these new findings. Professor, welcome to the Texas Standard.
David, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Let's begin with the mystery itself, a bit of a whodunit, and I've seen some of the YouTubes out there on your work. How did you and your colleagues go about tracking these brief outages, and what convinced you satellites, not something on the ground, were responsible?
Well, we wouldn't have been able to discover this were it not for a tip that we got a few years ago from a researcher inside the security services of the United Kingdom, who, for his own reasons, decided that he wanted to let us know that in this public data, if we looked at the right place, the right time, we would see this anomaly. And that started us off on a path that led to us finally identifying the satellite.
Who owns that satellite?
This is a satellite that is owned by Russia, owned and operated by Russia, was launched in around 2020. But it's part of a constellation of 6 satellites that form part of the sensory apparatus of the Russian early missile warning detection system. And so this is more than just a single satellite. This is a constellation that has a similar purpose, detecting missiles before they land in Russia. And we suspect that it might have a secondary mission, namely to interfere with GPS signals. But like you said earlier in your summary, that is only speculation at this point. What we know for sure is that they have the capability of interfering with GNSS signals. Whether the satellite was designed for that is unclear.
Yeah, I guess that would be the real question. Are there any clues as to whether or not this is an intentional disruption of GPS? Because on the one hand, you'd think, well, the Russian satellite could zoom in on GPS's main channel and try to jam it. But you made a discovery, your team made this discovery, that it wasn't like this satellite was directly targeting this channel. They were off by a few degrees or something, right?
Yeah, that's right. Instead of being exactly coincident with the frequency of the most common GPS signals, they were off by 2 megahertz, which still remains damaging, but it could be much more damaging if they tuned their transmitter down to be exactly coincident. So again, this goes to the question of intent. Is this a capability that they're testing in the neighborhood of the GPS signal? And in some potential future hot conflict, they will tune their transmitter down and have it directly coincide? Or is this that they've decided to use the GPS band because it's quiet and they are getting away with it because nobody noticed until now, even though by international treaty, they are not supposed to be broadcasting anything in that band that isn't coming from a regular GPS or GNSS satellite?
I think we've reached a point perhaps where GPS might be a little like electricity. It's so embedded in daily life that none of us really fully understand all the ways we might be affected if this became unreliable. But I'm wondering, as you look at what could be coming, is the greater risk a deliberate attempt to interfere with GPS, or the fact that we've built so much of modern society around this system that it sounds like might not have the backup it needs?
We certainly right now would be in a pretty tough spot if GPS were to go away tomorrow. Not just GPS, but the European Galileo system, the Chinese Beidou system, and even the Russian the system. If they were all to go away tomorrow, we'd be in a tough spot. We have been preparing for a time when we could fall back to other systems. Mm-hmm. But the truth is that there just isn't a silver bullet. There's nothing that is as inexpensive to integrate as GPS and as worldwide in its scope as GPS. So we're having trouble because the alternatives are expensive or they're local and nothing is quite as good. And I say this as somebody who's dedicated a lot of research to finding a backup. It's just not so easy to find something as economical and widespread as GPS.
But you would hope that someone is taking this seriously enough to think about perhaps workarounds or a backup or some kind of redundancy. I'm struck by the fact that you mentioned that someone in the UK national security infrastructure first reached out to you almost as it sounded to me like they were sort of sending out a help signal. And I'm wondering if governments are taking this seriously, and if policymakers are running with what you've found and trying to do something about it.
I do think that the policymakers and officials in the United Kingdom and in Europe in general are ahead on this. They are taking it more seriously. They understand how dependent they are, and then they've been laying down infrastructure, like I say, fiber optic cables going from the National Physical Laboratory in the UK into the center of London, where all of the financial exchanges are. Mm-hmm. They want those financial operations to not require GPS in the case of an outage. But here in the United States, honestly, we are behind in this. We pay a lot of lip service to backup systems to GPS and timing and positioning, but we really haven't implemented anything on a national scale. And there is a kind of sense that the private sector is going to save us, that new companies like Zona, aerospace company, which is setting up some low Earth orbiting constellation of satellites that are supposed to provide timing and positioning, that they will save us here in the United States, and we won't need another government program. But there are others who say, we do need another major government program, a backup, like the old E-LORAN or LORAN signals that we used to have. And maybe we can do that with broadcast television signals now that they are transitioning to digital. So there are many good ideas, but I would say we don't have our ducks in a row like Europe does.
Professor Todd Humphreys directs the Radio Navigation Laboratory at the University of Texas at Austin, and he and his team have been sounding an alarm, waving a red flag about what may be a huge vulnerability in a system that the entire world depends on greatly, and what may represent, and again underscore may, represent a major escalation in electronic warfare. Professor Humphreys, thanks so much for taking time to talk with us on The Standard.
It was my pleasure.
The Texas News Roundup is just around the corner, and you can keep up with news from across the state anytime at texasstandard.org. Texas Standard is also available via podcast, and you can find us on your favorite social media platforms.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UT San Antonio, a Carnegie Tier 1 public research institution, and designated as Texas's National Institute on Aging Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. More at utsa.edu.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Tom Perumian. A teenager convicted of stabbing another teen during a high school track meet last year in Frisco has been sentenced to 35 years in prison. Carmelo Anthony was found guilty of murder in a case that saw race play a central role outside the courtroom. Anthony is black. The victim, Austin Metcalf, was white. Collin County District Attorney Greg Willis spoke about the jury's decision while standing next to the twin brother of the victim.
This verdict sends a clear message. Violence like this won't be tolerated in our Collin County community, and we remain committed to protecting our schools and standing with victims and their families.
Supporters for both the defendant and the victim rallied outside the courthouse during the length of the trial. San Antonio Spurs fans celebrating their team's NBA Finals victory in New York became targets of assault following Monday night's victory over the Knicks. Police say they made 21 arrests related to fan interactions. State Senator Roland Gutierrez called on New York City Mayor Zoran Mondami to help keep the peace.
You need to get your cops in the right direction here because something is wrong. We don't do this to your people. We're not going to do this to your people.
Game 4 is scheduled for tonight at Madison Square Garden. Athletic directors with the Big 12 are discussing possible sanctions against Texas Tech. A Lubbock judge ruled that quarterback Brendan Sorsby could play this year after he was suspended for gambling violations. The NCAA is appealing that decision, and the Big 12 officials are considering their own sanctions if Sorsby is allowed back on the field. A new report by the Government Accountability Office found serious risks for people held at the largest immigrant detention camp in the country. The federal government watchdog agency says millions of dollars were wasted on contractors who failed to meet health and safety standards at the Fort Bliss tent facility. KTEP's Angela Kocherga reports from El Paso.
The GAO found gaps in medical services at the Texas detention camp, including no treatment plan for people with chronic conditions like diabetes or HIV. There was also no tuberculosis testing for new arrivals, and there were cases at the camp. Among the safety issues, a missing loaded firearm, inadequate security cameras, and a failure by ICE to inspect the $1.3 billion facility before it opened last year. 3 men have died in custody. The report says evidence in one case ruled a homicide by the El Paso medical examiner was missing or destroyed. I'm Angela Kocherga in El Paso.
I'm Tom Perumian in the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from University Extension at UT Austin, offering open enrollment to a wide variety of UT's undergraduate credit courses that can be taken by anyone from anywhere. More at extension.utexas.edu.
33 minutes past the hour Texas Standard Time, I'm Laura Rice. Mark Twain taught us that many people make the mistake of working diligently to develop a talent they don't have, while ignoring the ones they do have. Twain said genuine talent or genius is rarely discovered by friends. They're too close to it. It often takes an outsider to see the talent objectively. Texas Standard commentator W.F. Strong says he thought of these Twainian insights while reading the new biography on Nolan Ryan by sports journalist Tim Brown.
His book is simply titled Nolan. Good enough. In Texas, you just say Nolan, and everybody knows who you're talking about. And now that the Boys of Summer are taking over once again, I can recommend it as a fun summer read. Twain would have approved the way Nolan Ryan developed his own true talent. Nolan no doubt put in his 10,000 hours or more developing his pitching skills as a young man growing up in Alvin, Texas. Sometimes just throwing a tennis ball at an imaginary strike zone on the garage door for hours on end. Certainly there were people around Nolan who realized he had a rare gift, but perhaps few were in a position to realize so early that he was ready to be drafted into the major leagues when he was still in high school. As Tim Brown pointed out himself, you don't choose your gift, but with one, some men throw fastballs, others release beauty, sometimes both. Tim wrote he could throw, man could he throw. The same way one kid understood chemistry, another got English, another could sing. Nolan Ryan could throw. I've always been fascinated by descriptions of extraordinary talent or genius by those who experience it firsthand and who have the insight to understand the enormity of the gift on display before them. Think Salieri hearing Mozart play for the first time in Amadeus. Nolan recalled, I didn't know what I had. No one did. Only Red Murph. And who was Red Murph? He was a scout for the New York Mets. And what did Red Murph see when he first saw Nolan Ryan pitch as just a sophomore in high school? What he first saw was what he believed to be a 100-mile-per-hour fastball. Tim described the moment this way. The seams of the baseball fighting the air around it, a high-pitched scream, a whistle, the ball finding the catcher's mitt with a sound that he thought was that of a muffled rifle shot. He saw this twice, back to back, or you might say, heard it. Murph tried not to gasp, wrote Tim Brown. That would have been unprofessional. It would also give away his love-at-first-sight giddiness over a once-in-a-lifetime arm, a once-in-a-career find. Murph was sitting near another scout. Nolan threw a curveball, which was amateurish at best. Murph said to the other scout, "Oh, he doesn't have a very good curveball." But that was just Murph throwing a curve of his own. He wanted to get the other scout off the trail. 2 years later, Murph got the Mets, through considerable cajoling, to draft the young Nolan Ryan. He was drafted in the 12th round, the 295th player overall. He signed for $25,000 a year. I would suppose that was somewhat like getting Google at $1 a share. Nolan was, as Murph predicted, a once-in-a-lifetime find. In his career, which took him to the Astros and finally to the Rangers, He struck out 5,714 batters. No one else has been remotely close to that. He threw 7 no-hitters, 3 more than anyone else. His fastball was regularly clocked at over 100 miles per hour. But stats aside, the most resounding endorsement of his talent is this quote from Reggie Jackson, the famed power hitter known as Mr. October. He said, "Nolan was the only guy who could put fear in me. Not because he could get me out, but because he could kill me." Nolan was a force of nature. The poster of Nolan pummeling Robert Ventura in 1993, titled Fight Night in Texas, remains a favorite among sports memorabilia collectors. I'm W.F. Strong. These are stories from Texas. Some of them are true.
W.F. Strong is a professor of culture and communication at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. You can find more stories from Texas at texasstandard.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Still ahead, recovery for the Texas Hill Country following last year's July 4th flooding means many things, including helping the river itself heal. That story is next.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Realtors, providing representation at every stage of the home ownership journey, helping clients understand their options and manage complex transaction details. Info at texasrealestate.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider that's been caring for hardworking Texans for over 30 years. More at texasmutual.com/expert partner.
You've got it tuned to the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. About 135 people died in the Hill Country flooding last July 4th. We've followed stories about the lives lost and also those about prevention and accountability. A new short documentary tells yet another story about the recovery of the Guadalupe River itself. Its waters poured over its banks like never before in recorded history last year, spreading debris for miles and ripping down enormous numbers of trees. The documentary by Fin and Fur Films is called Hope for the Guadalupe. It's available now for everyone to see free of charge on YouTube. Ben Masters directed the film. Ben, welcome back to the Texas Standard.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I understand this is not a movie you at all set out to make, but your crew, which is working on a film about rivers already, was there as this began?
That's correct. So we are natural history filmmakers. We do kind of planet Earth type of movies, and we're making a film about Texas rivers. And on that 4th of July weekend, we were actually just out filming rain. Obviously, nothing like we could have imagined what happened. So we were all out there in the Hill Country, kind of ready to roll. And then whenever we heard about the catastrophic flooding, we went there, and we're there the morning of the 4th of July and had our cameras. And we did film a little bit on the 4th, but primarily it became very obvious very fast that we needed to get in there in the brush and just start helping people.
It makes sense hearing that story from you, because though this is a film about the river healing, it still is about the human loss. You spend really the first part of the documentary walking us through how we got here. Why is the element of human loss so necessary, even when talking about ecology?
Well, I think that, explaining why the river was damaged so much ecologically takes some explanation of the extent of the flood. And it's also extremely insensitive to talk about how we need to recover trees and a riparian area without acknowledging just the grief and loss of life that people experienced there. So, the movie is about restoring the Guadalupe River, but we had to show the flood. We had to acknowledge the grief and give people space in the movie to be sad. I mean, what happened is so sad. And to not have that be a part of the story would be disingenuous to the story itself. And, the characters that we show in the film that, are working to restore the river, they lost neighbors, they lost loved ones, they lost dear friends. And that's a part of their resolve of healing the river. It's partly to kind of, heal their community and kind of bring back some normalcy.
Can you talk about that work being done with landowners and how they're being asked to help restore these banks?
That section of the Guadalupe, they lost the majority of their trees. The majority of their riparian habitat was either destroyed in the flood itself or was destroyed in the removal of all of the debris afterwards. And these different orgs, these different folks created this vision of, one, going in there quickly and start spreading native grasses and forbs into the scarred floodplain to try to get ahead of invasive species filling in that vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, of getting several dozen nurseries across Texas to begin planting cypress, sycamore, walnut, baccharis, all of these native Texas riparian trees inside of their nurseries that were originated from the Guadalupe River itself, to actually replant trees that were adapted for the Guadalupe River. And in the next few years, they're going to grow and plant and nurture over 50,000 trees up and down the Guadalupe River in areas where those riparian forests were taken out.
There is a terrific explanation in your film about how no retaining wall is as good as a huge cypress tree. Could you walk us through a little about how restoring the river also does protect against future flooding?
The riparian zone is the zone of vegetation that is within the river's floodplain that is connected to the river's water. It's this really important part of the landscape that has these deep roots. It has this rich soil. And whenever the riparian area is healthy, it soaks up huge quantities of water into the soil. And then whenever you have dry periods, that water is like a sponge that slowly releases back into the river channel so that the river continues to have a base flow. But it's also important for flood resilience. Whenever it does flood, that water kind of dissipates, that water slows down. It's not rushing and gushing as fast as it would if it was just a big, naked floodplain where the water was traveling as fast as gravity would take it. And then on top of that, it's, the ultimate place to recreate as well. And that's whatever everybody goes to the Guadalupe for. It's for the amazing, river experience of floating through these cathedrals of cypress trees and seeing all the birds and catching all the fish and just enjoying life.
This movie is out there for folks to watch, no charge. And you end with opportunities for anyone to be involved or to donate to flood recovery. Is a faster recovery going to take more than just the Texans most directly affected?
Whenever I was there during the recovery efforts, I met a guy from North Carolina and I met a guy from Houston. And there was this canine team that was from Mexico that came in to help our fellow Texans in one of the worst natural disasters in the history of our country. And that really is continuing with the recovery efforts of the river itself. It's not just the landowners there along the Guadalupe River. Obviously, they're crucial for the effort. But it's nurseries across the state that are propagating the trees. It's money that has poured in from garden clubs from all over the state, from Houston, from Dallas. And it's volunteers that are showing up and helping with river cleanup efforts and with seed plantings and with tree plantings. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and there's thousands of people that are involved in this restoration effort. And, that's a really beautiful thing to see.
Ben Masters is the director of the new short documentary Hope for the Guadalupe. You can watch it now for free on YouTube. We'll have a link at texasstandard.org. It's also screening July 1st on Austin PBS. Ben, thanks again.
Thank you.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. In less than a week, North Texas will host its first match of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, kicking off a month-long event expected to draw hundreds of thousands of visitors to the region. That means more flights, more cars, more buses, more folks moving through one of the largest metros in the U.S. And though most of the fans will be focused on what's happening on the field, some scientists will be paying close attention to something else, something in the air. Wingyao Li is assistant professor and director of the Atmospheric Intelligence and Modeling Lab at UT Arlington. Professor, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thanks for having me.
I gather this is a rare opportunity of sorts for someone who studies the atmosphere such as yourself. What can the World Cup tell us about air quality that you couldn't learn from any other ordinary day in North Texas?
Okay, so the Dallas-Fort Worth is a very large and fast-growing region.
Yeah.
And previous studies shows that the traffic is now the major source of air pollution here. And the World Cup gave us a unique stress test. We will have more visitors, more cars, more flights, and we can observe how the environment responds to this short period of intense human activity here.
I see. Well, paint a picture for listeners who don't know what's involved here. How do you plan to measure any changes in air quality?
Okay, so we place sensors near the ATT Stadium because that is where large crowds and events-related traffic will concentrate. We also have sensors near the DFW airport to capture the influence of the increased flight and airport-related traffic.
I see.
Also, we will use the TCEQ monitoring data across the Dallas and the Fort Worth to understand the broader region pictures, not just one location.
TCEQ being the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Now, you have factors like ozone, you have temperature, obviously, humidity. What do you consider to be the most important from a public health standpoint?
So the air pollution is a complex question. The weather also can affect the air pollution levels.
Right.
And also the chemical species, it also affects the reactions of this air pollution. So all of these variables are very important to us.
Now, what do you expect to see? I suspect you have a working hypothesis here.
We expect a nonlinear relationship between the emission and pollutions. So based on our previous study, so we analyzed the data from 2022 to 2024. We found that during the weekdays, the nitrogen dioxide, the NO2 level is higher than weekend. This is very reasonable because we have more traffic during weekdays.
Yeah.
However, the pollution like ozone, their level during the weekend are higher than the weekdays. So you see this non-linear relationship.
Okay, well, the World Cup lasts only a few weeks. But as you sort of referenced earlier, North Texas is adding more people faster than most other parts of the country. And I'm curious how much of this is really about understanding the consequences of rapid growth, not so much a surge of people.
We see the DFW population increase and also city expansions. That's why we plan to deploy more monitors in this region to help us to understand the air quality here. And also we will combine the ground-based monitors with NASA NOAA satellite observations. The NASA NOAA, they have satellite observation cover more years, so we can see the trend. We can see the impact of the increase of human activity and traffic here to the air pollutions. Also, the satellite observation have a better coverage. You know, the DFW is very large. Even though we have a lot of monitors, there are still space gap between these monitors. However, the satellite data can give us a better spatial coverage.
Yeah, that NASA satellite data is going to be important, I can see. Well, now let's take this out of the laboratory setting to the real world, depending on what you find. Mm-hmm. What do you think the upshot might be in a practical sense? What would this mean for, say, a policymaker or someone trying to come up with what the Dallas-Fort Worth area can do to reduce pollution?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first, we need to understand what are the sources of the pollutions and what the composition of the pollutions. So different sources have different chemical footprints and different health impacts. And if we know the source, we can have different strategies to reduce the emissions. So if we know what is the major source, we know the source of the pollution pattern, the emissions, we can have different strategies to reduce the pollution level while not stop the development. We want to have both development and clean air.
Huinyao Li is an assistant professor of Earth and Environmental Studies and director of the Atmospheric Intelligence and Modeling Lab at UT Arlington. Thanks so much for taking time to talk with us on The Standard.
Thank you.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard.
And audience and engagement editor Wells Dunbar is in the studio now, typing away over there.
Typing. Tap, 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 tap.
You've got thoughts.
I certainly do. And thankfully, I'm not the only one because we're talking fuel prices and whether they're changing Texans' summer plans this week, the talk of Texas. And we're hearing from plenty of folks. Obviously, a lot of volatility, a very fast-moving situation there. The U.S. and Iran exchanging strikes today. That having ripple effects, really marked ripple effects on travel. And, I see here reporting from the New York Times, reporting on that new federal inflation data released today. Apparently, I don't know if you saw this, but U.S. airfare shot up 26.7% in May compared with this time last year, up nearly 3% from the month before. So we've been talking about, gas prices, whether or not that's going to affect road trips. But we've heard from many people, citing stuff like this, saying that these plane tickets are just so expensive. Gas, not that bad. We're looking at a current statewide average of around $3.61. But of course, that volatility doesn't appear to be going anywhere. There was talk of a ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran, but that seems to be tested as of this morning. But obviously, lots to consider, and folks are taking it all in. Regina Jakish sent us a great email here. She notes that almost 3 months ago, she bought a secondhand all-electric EV and slow charges it at home and uses it for errand running in town, mainly to save gas and wear and tear on her other vehicle, she says. Tacoma, we know those Toyotas run forever. But she picked this 10-year-old Nissan Leaf up for $4,000, low mileage and 80% battery life left. And that's an interesting thing too, Laura. I saw this recent report about how EVs are maintaining more and more of their purchase price because the batteries are indeed lasting longer than initially predicted. So we can see here in this one example from a listener, a real concrete example of how they are, taking this into account and whether or not, they're going to be using the EV for some summer travel. So these are the stories we want to hear. If you're on the fence about taking that trip, if you're maybe going to push that, that plane travel off, maybe, further into the summer or even into the fall, we want to hear your stories. How is this playing out in your day-to-day life? So go to texasstandard.org/talk because we want to hear from you. We're going to do our best to share all these responses later in the week, Laura.
That's right. Your voices, your perspectives make up this segment that Wells puts together. So we need to hear from you. Go to texasstandard.org/talk. Audience and engagement editor Wells Dunbar. Special shout out to our technical director Casey Cheek.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington family, and St. David's Foundation. Additionally, Texas Mutual Insurance Company is a founding sponsor of Texas Standard.